Hello, it's Martin from Wisely Automotive, checking in from Manchester. Collected yet another very highly, almost fully spec'd i3S in the lovely Blue Ridge Mountain colour. But given I have a long journey ahead, I thought I would take you along because this car being equipped with the Driving Assistant Plus, it will help me do most of the driving on the way down to London. Trip computer now reset so we can officially begin the journey. And let me walk you through the entire driving assistant package, because yes, it is a package and you get everything bundled in. Starting with the speed limit information right in the instrument cluster, then the autonomous emergency braking assistant, and of course the highlight, which is why most people want it, the adaptive cruise control, together with the traffic jam assistant, which works on motorways. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but hopefully I will get stuck in traffic so I can show you later in the video. Let me start with the collision avoidance assistant. It's not something I want to be testing out on public roads, and hopefully I never have to rely on it. But in principle, it's a safety system which is by default on. So every time you start the vehicle, it comes on, and you know it's on by this green ring around the vehicle button. It means it's basically looking out for obstacles ahead of you to make sure that you don't crash into something, specifically other vehicles or pedestrians, but it can only detect pedestrians during the daytime because this entire driving assistance system only relies on a single camera which is mounted up here in the windscreen, and we will discuss the hardware in a second because it is actually quite relevant in this case. To customize it, you can go into the iDrive menus, but the quickest way to do it is that you can press it once and the button works as a shortcut to bring you into the relevant settings. As you saw, pressing it once turned the ring orange, and that just means that it deactivated the pedestrian alerts. You can keep pressing it and it will toggle between all systems on or just the vehicle collision warning on. In here you can also configure the timing of the audible warnings. Early is a little bit too early, and especially in London it can beep at you all the time, so I will set it to medium. It's important to mention this setting only adjusts the timing of the audible warning, in addition to a symbol of a red car in the instrument cluster if the time to the vehicle ahead of you is not sufficient. I'm putting a lot of emphasis on this because yes, the system is capable of slamming on the brakes as well. This only happens in very rare scenarios, so please don't try it out with your friends and family. There is a lot of variables to make sure that the system doesn't slam on the brakes unnecessarily, which could of course cause an accident in and of itself, but regardless of which warning preference you have set, the braking reaction is always the same. If you want to completely disable it, you can do so, and it actually can be handy, for example, when it's snowing or heavily raining outside, or if you're driving in dense fog, because the system in scenarios like this tends to get completely confused. So all you need to do is press and hold the button for a few seconds until the ring completely disappears. And now if I go back into the respective menu, you see that both of those options are unticked. Just a short press to turn them on again, and as I said, every time you start the vehicle they would come on automatically as well. I'm afraid that's all the active safety features in the i3 covered, because despite the driving assistant carrying the Plus name and the same styling of the user interface like in other BMWs, there is no lane keep assistant, lane departure warning or blind spot monitoring, which, to be fair, in a compact vehicle like this with excellent visibility all around is not an issue at all. But if you're coming from higher end BMWs, it's just something to keep in mind that even the lane keeping is not an option on any i3, regardless of age or specification. With that, we can move on to the speed limit information, because, again, while this is quite common on most modern cars, and in fact, because of the European regulation practically standard, it wasn't the case for the i3. You still had to go for the driving assistant package to get the feature, and it simply displays the current speed limit right next to your immediate speed in the instrument cluster, regardless of which data screen you are on. I just like to leave mine on battery percentage. If you have a car with the Driving Assistant Plus, but the speed limit info is not displayed, that's most likely because it's disabled in the setting. So all you need to do is go into My Vehicle, iDrive Settings, Displays, Instrument Cluster, and then make sure that speed limit info is indeed ticked. If you're buying an i3 from us, we always do a factory reset as part of the preparation process, and by default the feature is turned on, but it's something to keep in mind if you are buying elsewhere. However, having said that, it's always good to wipe all of the user profiles and start with a clean sheet. And lastly, to confirm, for vehicles without the Driving Assistant Plus package, even though I'm sure there is some speed limit information in the navigation database, you do not get that displayed in the instrument cluster nor in the main iDrive screen. I only have that now because I'm running Apple Maps through Apple CarPlay. If you want to learn more about Apple CarPlay on the i3, make sure to check out the link in the top right hand corner. But if you use the built-in BMW system, even with this Driving Assistant Plus package, there is no speed limit information displayed anywhere. However, I've been waffling and driving on the motorway for a while now, so it's time to let the star of the show shine. Of course, I'm talking about the adaptive cruise control. To enable it, you first need to press the cruise control button in the bottom left corner on the steering wheel. This goes for all i3s regardless of whether they have adaptive or non-adaptive cruise control, because if I try to use any of the buttons now, nothing happens. You first need to put the cruise control into a standby mode. You saw that there was a brief message saying that cruise control is ready, and as we are entering the 60 mph zone, I can, for example, press the set button to set it to my current speed, and obviously I can use the plus and minus buttons respectively to adjust the target speed, which is now highlighted in green instead of red in the instrument cluster. I can either adjust in 1 mph increments if I gently use the plus and minus buttons, or I can push past the point of resistance and then I'm adjusting in 5 mph jumps. So that's set to 60 miles per hour, and I can just relax and let the car do most of the driving. To adjust the following distance, I can keep pressing the distance button on the left side of the steering wheel. Just like the cruise control always defaults to being off after vehicle restart, the distance is always set to 3 out of 4. So I like to have it on the closest setting, especially in these dense traffic situations. It still maintains a safe gap, and the gap changes depending on the vehicle speed, but especially around London, if you are on the 3 or 4 setting, people just keep cutting in front of you all the time. And yeah, you can see that the cruise control is working as it should. In other words, it is maintaining a safe and comfortable gap to the vehicle head. I'm not touching the pedals at all. From the moment I've turned it on, I haven't done anything other than the steering. And you can have a certain degree of confidence in it, because if you see a vehicle depicted in the instrument cluster ahead of you, that means that the i3 is locked onto the preceding vehicle and adjusting the speed accordingly. That's the theory. What does it work like in practice? Pretty well, actually, especially considering that it's a system based only on a single relatively low resolution camera running on a computer from 2013. Obviously, since then, a lot of cars have implemented radar in addition to the cameras to get a better idea of the exact speed of the vehicle ahead and help in, for example, low light or bad weather conditions. And on the other end of the spectrum, we are to a certain extent coming full circle, because Tesla has dropped radar and is relying on vision only, but using much higher resolution cameras and a lot more processing to better analyze the video inputs. But look, it's doing the job, and it's actually quite smooth. This is one of the important things which doesn't always come across in videos, but cars like, for example, the MG4 do have adaptive cruise control fitted as standard now, using both a camera and a radar. And while it most likely stays operational in more driving conditions, it definitely isn't as smooth as the i3. This just gradually applies accelerator input when it needs to, and even the transition onto regen and braking if needed, it can use physical brakes in addition to regen as well. It's all very well judged. It's like a good professional chauffeur. There are limitations, however, the poor weather being one of them, and in fact even on the opposite end of the spectrum, if you've got too much sun low down shining into the windscreen, it can dazzle the camera, and I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet. As we continue the journey, we may encounter a scenario where the system simply drops out. You don't get much of an advance warning either, you just get a message on the display saying cruise control unavailable, and because the i3 has pretty strong regenerative braking, the moment the cruise control drops out, that is applied almost instantly. So you have to be really paying attention. This is still a level 2 driving assistance system, not a driver replacement. You can't be on your phone, you can't be distracted, you shouldn't be driving tired because of a scenario like this where you may need to take over immediately within a split second. Or at the end of the day, it still is a computer system which is not 100% perfect. So sometimes, especially in complicated merge situations, it can lock onto the incorrect vehicle and it will try to send you into the car which is right ahead of you. The moment you put the indicator on, it also automatically starts accelerating even before you've fully merged over into the adjacent lane, which is very nice because it means that on the motorway you don't have to give it manual accelerator input to get past slower moving vehicles. If you want to, you still can. So for example, we are doing 60 now, but if you want to do 62 just temporarily to pass someone, you can give it light throttle input and you will see the 60 still stays highlighted in green, which means that that's what the adaptive cruise control is going to hold, but I can temporarily override it. And the moment I let go of the accelerator pedal, the symbol showing that the system will maintain a gap to the vehicle ahead is restored, and it's holding the set target speed. Just for the sake of completeness, you can intuitively cancel it just by pressing the brake pedal. So if I lightly tap the brake, it goes red. But with the i3 again having the strong regenerative braking, it's quite a jerky move. So if you are a professional, the way you do it is once you have the cruise control running, you can press the cruise control button on the steering wheel and that disengages it, and you can almost catch the deceleration using your accelerator pedal, and the transition from automated or assisted driving to fully manual driving is silky smooth. Having said all of this, we've been doodling along so far, but I'm ready to put my foot down, or better said, let the computer put its foot down. So up to 70 miles per hour, indicator on, acceleration starts immediately to get past the lorry. Unfortunately, the i3 is not smart enough to not undertake, so I have to disengage the system now because we have got someone absolutely hogging the passing lane. So once the opportunity arises, I can manually switch over to lane 4 and resume the cruise control to the standby target, which was 70 miles per hour. And now it's just nicely doing its thing. Unlike Tesla's autopilot, the i3 does not freak out if you are passing lorries as long as they are in their lane. And yeah, now that this white van has moved in front of us, it has locked onto that. Actually, it's a good opportunity to test out the maximum speed the i3 cruise control can handle. So it can go up to 85 miles per hour, which I think is actually not far off the maximum speed of the i3. So you're not really restricted on how you have to drive if you want to use the driver assistance features. Now, while I'm charging, let's answer one of the most frequently asked questions. Can you retrofit the adaptive cruise control? And the simple answer is no, because while it may seem like you only need this little camera at the top of the windscreen, keep in mind that means that there needs to be a cutout for that camera. And the windscreen itself is actually different, and by the way, a little bit more expensive than on cars without the CAFAs. That means the entire cowling for the rear view mirror is different. There's probably an additional wiring harness, and when we look at the steering wheel, that's obviously also different. Not only do you get these additional buttons, which you could theoretically say, oh yes, you will replace them. They come in pairs, left and right side, so you would need to get both. But there's also an additional module behind the airbag to take the inputs from the buttons themselves and also the actual rim of the steering wheel, because to detect that you have got the hands on the wheel when the traffic jam assist is active, there are these pressure sensors all around. I actually would like to know exactly how it works, but it's not a capacitive steering wheel, so you need to actually apply some grip onto it. It's either a piezoelectric or a pneumatic sensor inside. And you can actually tell the difference, because these vehicles with the adaptive cruise control system, they do have a slightly more squidgy padded steering wheel. And the last thing to mention in terms of the hardware is that the camera is a prerequisite for the automatic high beams in the i3 bundled in with the matrix functionality. So this car in fact has those. It's probably the rarest option out there, and we have done a video on how it performs, so feel free to check that out in the top right hand corner as well. because it's winter time, the roads are absolutely filthy, and this almost film has developed on the windscreen, and the camera is struggling with visibility for the adaptive cruise control system. It already dropped out once, but this is a good opportunity to mention that if you don't want to use the adaptive cruise control, you can still switch to manual cruise control. So I will disable the adaptive cruise for now, and I will simply press and hold the distance button, at which point I get a brief message saying that the distance control has been completely deactivated, and instead of the car symbol, when I set the cruise control now, it behaves just like good old non-adaptive cruise control. So it will let me get very close to the vehicle ahead, it will not slow down for other traffic. So just throwing it out there that while yes, the system is not the most reliable and not everybody likes adaptive cruise control, this way you do at least have the backup option. To go back to adaptive cruise, you just press the distance button once, and then the car immediately uses the camera to keep a safe distance to the vehicle ahead. 184 miles later, the M6 was surprisingly clear, the M1 was also surprisingly clear, but I have reached the M25, which means London, and pretty much standstill traffic. A couple of things I want to point out. Number one, all of the speed adjustment is done manually. So even though the car has correctly recognized that the temporary speed limit based on the electronic signs is 40 miles per hour, I still have to adjust the target cruise control speed myself. And secondly, as expected, because of the poor weather conditions combined with the worn out wiper blades, the adaptive cruise control kept dropping out, especially in the second part of the journey when it got dark and it started raining. However, now that I'm still on the motorway just crawling along, I can engage the traffic jam assistant. There is a dedicated button for it on the steering wheel. There's a lot of conditions which need to be met. Namely, you need to be on a motorway. You don't have to have a destination set in the sat-nav, but the car needs to recognize that you are on a motorway. Secondly, you cannot be going faster than 35 miles per hour. And lastly, there need to be clear lane markings and a lead vehicle ahead of you, which makes sense because otherwise you would be much going quicker than 35 miles per hour on a motorway. You can see how it operates based on the depiction in the instrument cluster. So it's almost like a tier above the adaptive cruise control where it takes over the steering, but the base technology and the principle is the same as the adaptive cruise. So a little pro tip for you is that if you are in standstill traffic, you will see that after a while, if you are stood stationary, the adaptive cruise control will not resume on its own because the 40, which is the target speed, will go from green to red. Red meaning it's in standby mode. You can just press resume on the steering wheel or give the accelerator pedal a light nudge and it will go back to its previous settings. This is there for safety reasons, to make sure that if you get a little bit distracted, for example, a pedestrian steps in front of you, the car will not just run them over. Secondly, the steering is now active. You still need to have your hands on the wheel, and it's very much a level 2 system. Unlike some other driver assistance systems which are on the market, which are still level 2, with the i3 relying only on that single, quite narrow field of view camera, it's not very good at spotting people cutting in last minute in front of you, so you really have to pay attention. But this is exactly the kind of scenario it was designed for, just crawling in traffic. If you don't have your hands on the steering wheel, the car will get cross with you and the steering wheel symbol in the instrument cluster starts flashing. As you can see, if the stationary dwell period is quite short, the car will resume on its own. So in this stop-start traffic, it's doing a fantastic job, and it's also doing a good job staying centered within the lane. Just for illustrative purposes, I can just keep my hands close to the wheel but not on the wheel, and you can see that the wheel is adjusting the course as needed. As mentioned previously in the hardware section of this video, the steering wheel rim has pressure sensors in it. So to get the message about your hands on the wheel to go away, you need to almost grip the steering wheel with a little bit of force. It's not a torque sensor, so applying torque to the wheel doesn't make any difference. And likewise, it's not a capacitive sensor, so if you just lightly rest your hands on the steering wheel, it will still complain that you are not paying attention. But at the end of the day, this is quite soothing. I never thought I would want to be in traffic. It's just very mesmerizing watching the computer do its thing, but yes, you really still need to pay attention. I have a couple of complaints from my long-term usage of the system. Other than obviously the unreliability in poor weather conditions, it sometimes leaves a little bit too much of a gap if cars just crawl ahead of you slowly and then it tries to close it very quickly. So it's maybe not the most comfortable thing for passengers, but it really depends on what scenario you are in. And what we are doing now, doing 10-20 miles per hour, it's doing absolutely great. This is basically on par with Tesla's autopilot, but using technology from 2013. So quite impressive in that regard. And just like at high speeds, even at low speeds, the cruise control stays very smooth, especially considering it's not the latest system out there. It comes to a complete stop very gradually. It doesn't feel like you hit a curb. So it is all very well tuned. You can use this on a daily basis, even in urban conditions. Again, you just have to keep an eye out on pedestrians because it will not slow down for them. The AEB system, which can recognize pedestrians, that's almost like a last resort before an impact. So that's not something to rely on. The adaptive cruise, you will have to disengage yourself in anticipation of any pedestrian crossings or anything like that. For example, now the car did quite a significant steering correction to stay in the lane. Look now, it's steering on its own, despite there being worn out lane markings from the previous lanes. Quite impressive, isn't it? As the traffic is speeding up, we will reach an interesting situation because we are at 35 miles per hour and the vehicles ahead are pulling away. So the gap starts flashing on the instrument cluster and I can press resume. And at that point, traffic jam assist gets overridden and I am back to using adaptive cruise control and steering myself. However, the traffic jam assist, as you can see from the additional lines below the usual adaptive cruise control graphic, mean that the moment we dip below 35 miles per hour again and the conditions are met, the car will assist with the steering yet again. So for example now, 35 miles per hour, steering wheel symbol came on automatically. I didn't need to press the traffic jam assist button again, and the car is doing the steering at the moment. The rest of the journey was pretty uneventful. The driving assistant did a good job helping me out and got me into London. The average efficiency for the trip was in the region of 3.5 miles per kilowatt-hour, which I'm afraid is to be expected in cold weather in combination with driving at quite high speeds with the i3, which is not exactly aerodynamic. It's the following day now, so let's conclude with some final thoughts. Look, there is no denying I'm a huge fan of adaptive cruise control systems, so I will definitely say it's a very nice feature to have. But that's the key point. It's a nice to have on the i3 and not a must-have, because despite it being very well calibrated with smooth power application and regen as well, so you can use it in day-to-day scenarios around town and at motorway speeds, the problem lies with the unreliability of it, because it's great that you can use it when the weather is just right and there's enough clouds in the sky, but it hasn't started raining yet. But for example, the moment you get a little bit of precipitation, or you're driving directly into a low sun, or counterintuitively, even if you have the sun behind you, but you are following a white van, that is enough of a reflection to confuse the system sometimes. So you just really have to keep that in mind, that it doesn't work in all conditions. Having said that, it's nice that you at least have the backup of the standard non-adaptive cruise control system, which you can switch into. And there is no denying that it was very impressive for technology coming out in 2013. So that's where I'm going to leave it, because it's a good feature to have. You just need to manage your expectations. If you are shopping out for i3s with the Driving Assistant Plus package just because you want the safety aspect of it, the autonomous collision avoidance, then good news, I would recommend also looking at Mini Electrics, for example, with the F56 generation of the Mini Electric, even though it's a very similar car to the i3 underneath. All of them equipped with the level 2 trim or above have the autonomous emergency braking bundled in. And I'm afraid if you want a Mini Electric with adaptive cruise, that's an even more rare option than on the i3. So again, you just need to pick what you prefer at the end of the day. And I think that's about it. I hope you learned everything you wanted to know about the system. If that's the case, make sure to hit the like button. However, if you're curious about how the i3 compares to the latest and greatest BMWs with respect to the assisted driving technology, make sure to check out this video. And if you're interested in EVs in general, definitely make sure to subscribe. Thanks again for watching, and we will see you in the next one.